There's so much backlash against the purity culture going on right now. And for those viewers who might be watching now on YouTube Live or listening on the podcast, well, what's this purity culture? I mean, at first it strikes you as an odd concept because our culture, a purity culture, I mean, look at the Grammys, look at the Super Bowl. I mean, like, this is not a purity culture in which we're being marinated in. But nonetheless, some people have said, hey, there's a real issue with what we grew up in our churches and our youth groups, and there's a bit of a backlash. Maybe give our listeners an idea of what is this purity culture that a lot of people are kind of getting upset about.
I think purity culture, well, I think we have to separate it from kind of like the militant purity culture that maybe some of our Protestant brothers and sisters encountered. But the Catholic purity culture, I think, looks a little bit different. But I think what kind of comes under that umbrella is just chastity that feels kind of pressured, or that purity is like the height of virtue, that physical purity is the height of virtue, which includes like loss of virginity as like the capital sin, and just kind of that overemphasis on purity, especially physical purity, when it comes to dating or relationships, and just kind of that fear-based culture when it comes to purity.
Yeah, I know you'll agree with me that, we should add as a disclaimer as we dive into this subject that we're not saying that virginity is not a big deal. It's like,
yes.
Purity, sexual sin, not a big problem. Like, we're not saying that at all. I remember one girl tell me that, like, her boyfriend kept pressuring her to sleep with him and give him her virginity. And he kept telling, it's not a big deal. And I said, look, just tell the guy, if it's not a big deal, then why are you so interested in getting it?
Yes.
And that'll probably quiet that guy up pretty fast. And we're also not saying that if you lost your virginity, don't fret, not a big deal. Hey, life goes on. Like, okay, you're allowed to feel mourning or loss or whatever. If you're feeling that, you're allowed to feel what you feel, because, virginity is a great gift. It is. I mean, the church honors the saints, the virgins, the confessors, the martyrs, the virgins. The church honors the perpetual virginity of Mary. So, I thought it'd be important that before we really dive in, we explain that we're not saying that virginity is not a good, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the biggest hinge point there is, and what we're probably going to talk about more, is virginity is a gift because you are. And I think too often purity culture, or what we want to call purity culture, flips it, where it's like you are a gift because you have your virginity, right? So we're more we're saying virginity is a gift because you are a person, and this is a gift because of you, rather than kind of the narrative that has been sold a little too often.
No, I've never heard it put that way, but that's gold. I mean, that is really good stuff. And I think as we dive in to what I would consider like the big 7 problems with idolizing virginity, I think first we need to set a bit of a historical context that I want to dive into, of like, well, why this big push for abstinence and virginity, especially in the 1990s and the 2000s. And we got to set the historical context that, after the sexual revolution started in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, we saw an unprecedented rise in sexual activity among young people, especially high school kids. Starting in the early 1990s, we were at a point where the majority of high school students were currently sexually active. So it was 54% of American high school kids were sexually active in the early 1990s. And so with this early sexual activity came skyrocketing STDs. We had unwanted pregnancies. We had millions of people dying of AIDS. You had peer pressure. So essentially a great devaluation, so to speak, of purity. People saying, look, it's not a big deal. My wife, Crystal, would share in her testimony that, when she was thinking of losing her virginity at the age of 15, the friends like, look, it's not a big deal. As long as you feel ready, just get it over with. Everybody's doing it. I mean, just get it over with. Like you're talking about like removing your wisdom teeth or something. But, and so just this devaluation of like, it's not a big deal. But then I'd meet the girls afterwards. I remember meeting a girl in Chicago in a real poor area after her high school talk. And she and I were sitting alone talking. And she kind of held out her hands to me and she said, Jason, last night my hands were filled with pools of my own blood from cutting myself after I hooked up with that guy again. I came home with so much self-hatred and guilt. And some people would look at that. See, that's purity culture. They overemphasized her physical value. And so she felt this shame. But it's like, wait a minute, time out. Like she was used by another person. The solution to that is not to numb her conscience and say, I'm sexually liberated. Who cares if he even texts me afterwards? It's like, no, let her feel this, because there was almost such a targeting of women's innocence in the wrong way. I remember one girl told me she overheard a couple boys in her high school saying this quote. She said, "We already got all the seniors and juniors. Let's go de-virginize the freshmen and sophomores." And so this is the culture of what was going on. And so, a lot of people in government are like, oh, give these kids condoms. That's what they need. They just need more safe sex. But that message of safe sex, to me, I've always said, is so degrading to women because, to be blunt, it reduces a woman to her genitals. Because, look, you didn't get pregnant. You don't have gonorrhea. You're safe. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm protected? Not quite. And so because of all that was going on, I think the pendulum kind of swung back in the other direction. So by the late 1990s, the government was doing what's called Title V abstinence education. This is federal funding to the tune of about $50 million a year of abstinence education. Now, that pales in comparison to what was being dished out for safe sex education. But finally, abstinence was getting some money. So you saw purity balls, purity rings, this focus on abstinence more than chastity, virginity rocks t-shirts, modest is hottest t-shirts. And now the generation who went through that is expressing some indigestion, so to speak, of the message of abstinence, modest is hottest, it didn't quite hit the mark. So would you say that paints a fairly fair picture of, where the pendulum has swung? And now that we've gone all the way over here, people are wanting to find some middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think pendulum was the word that came to mind for me too. Because Satan always tempts us to extremes, right? It's always going to either be like virginity is nothing or virginity is everything. And where we need to go is virginity is something. It's something sacred and good, but it does need to be that middle line. And yeah, I totally agree. I think pendulum is the perfect word. We've maybe swung a little too far, and it's time to just bring the dial back to a place where people aren't afraid and they don't feel like dirt or damaged goods, but also they treat their virginity with the respect and the sacredness that should be treated with,
Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that little clip, but if you want to see the whole episode where this came from, just click the link here. And in the meantime, we want to invite you to help us share this message, and there's a couple things you can do real quick. Number one, if you like or comment or share this video, YouTube will actually show it to more people. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell. We release videos every single day, and you'll be notified as soon as those come out. If you want to help us also to spread this message, you can support us at patreon.com/Jason Evert. That helps us to create these videos and show them to the whole world. God bless.